Welcome, one and all, to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex Midas. I am joined each and every week by my co-host, Jacob Negro, where we talk about everything related to competitive Magic and how you can qualify for the Pro Tour. If you'd like to support us, the best way to do so is over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. At the moment, we have one tier that's $1 a month, and for that, you get access to all of our exclusive content. For all of our patrons who have supported us thus far, on behalf of Jacob and I would like to thank you very much. And if you'd like to follow us also over on YouTube, that would be much appreciated. Of course, you can also listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening, and please enjoy the rest of the podcast. Okay, Jacob, you're now a father. How does it feel?
Pretty great. It's pretty awesome, to be honest. Like, just always cool, just hanging out with my son, and I've gotten to spend pretty much full time with him. This recording will probably be one of the longest stretches away from him I've had since he's been born.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, well, it's been a week or whatever, so yeah. Congrats. Yeah,
Thanks.
That's really cool. Well, I'm excited to get back into the Magic swing of things. I didn't get to talk to you very much about Magic last week, and we had the release of Secrets of Strixhaven, so lots of cool cards hitting the scene. Of course, this weekend we've got the Pro Tour, so your team and a lot of other teams are working hard to build Pro Tour decks. I've just been sort of playing with brews and whatnot and on the standard ladder, nothing too crazy. How much have you been paying attention to standard and all that?
Yeah, a lot more the last few days. I've been seeing what my team has been settling in on for their deck choices. They've, had to submit their decks at noon today, even though it's all locked in for everybody. It's just a heads up for people listening. I'm not going to share anything about what decks they chose or didn't choose because, it could just be a tiny edge to someone else in the field. This is kind of a small callback, but I remember Pro Tour March of the Machines, Alan Wu, posted his Grixis mid-range deck on Twitter that him and just a few other people were playing, not thinking it really mattered after decklist submission. And then on Thursday, all of Handshake had proxied up their decklist and played matches against it. So they just got to play matches against it before the Pro Tour actually started, which I definitely would not advise sharing your whole decklist because I think, for strong players, it would be pretty advisable for any team to maybe do that on Thursday.
Sure.
Because
kind of crazy.
That's a unique thing, even though it's open deck lists in the PT, especially the last one of Spelementals or whatever, you wouldn't want somebody to practice against Spelementals. It does you no good to let
absolutely not.
Opponents have that kind of, forethought. They might sideboard better because, even the best players in the world, I think, are likely to sideboard wrong the first time in a matchup or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Man, it's one thing to think about a deck if you saw someone post about it. It'd be another to proxy it and play with it. It's a little unsporting, I would say, but certainly on the line. Maybe not.
Yeah.
It's preparing. Yeah.
Yeah, just preparing and gives them an excuse to maybe play more with their constructed deck and think about it more too,
Yeah, maybe. Well, anyways, certainly you're not going to be giving away any information. That's fine. I don't imagine, just having a kid last week, you're not going to be as up to date as you normally would be for the Pro Tours since you're skipping this one, but we'll give our takes, and it's fun to talk about regardless.
Yep.
So, yeah, what do you think of the format? I mean, there's all kinds of deck diversity, right? You can play, is it aggro? Is it tempo? Is it mid-range? Is it control?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if over half the PT was all blue-red decks, but I made a list and it's 6 different blue-red decks in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of all over the place.
It's funny because a lot of the decks are sort of becoming hybrid decks too, where they all are taking pieces from one another, so that they're looking different than they were even before Strixhaven, where the prowess decks incorporating lots of crabs and some decks have the horse and just all sorts of things. So the decks, I mean, the games when you play against the decks are all pretty different. Even, when your opponent plays Steam Vents, you're not sure what you're up against. I'd say the most common set of cards is Storm Chaser's Talon Boomerang Basics, but I don't know that 100% of the decks are doing that.
Yeah. Of all these blue-red decks, the only one I feel that's not doing that is Spelementals and then sometimes Lessons. But I think maybe even right now Lessons is favoring that. I'm never too much in touch with the Lessons players. Sometimes I feel like every Lessons player you talk to says they don't play it, and then another time every Lessons player you talk to says they do play it. But there's certainly two different ways to go about that.
Right. Let's see. I'm going to share. So we've got a challenge here, the standard showcase challenge, that we're just going to go over and use it to just sort of talk about deck lists and whatnot.
Yeah. So
I think
one of the
Prowess has got to be the more
popular
popular
decks,
version, right?
Yeah, but without Elusive Otter, I think that's going to be the most popular flavor of blue-red going into the Pro Tour. So like 4 Crab, 4 Slick Shot Show Off, and 4 Storm Chasers talents is basically the only threats in the main deck. And, you know, the Ops Sleight of Hand, now they have Flow State, so they're paying attention to their sorcery count. Naturally, they're going to have Sleight of Hand and Boomerang Basics, but you'll see things like Stock Up or Impractical Joke as some additional sorceries to have access to. Maybe more main deck counter magic because they have the crabs. Notably, Get Out is kind of a prowess supporting card, and maybe we'll play some other things. But, you know, bouncing the crab is quite effective, I'll say. It just kind of maneuvering combat. It's not as great if you just played a single Get Out to bounce a single crab, but like Boomerang Basics on crab has looked like a very fine play in standard, I'll say.
Sure, or if you're bouncing like you know, a talent and a crab, especially if the crab is down to 2 mana, right?
Yeah, certainly you want to, you know, the talent is kind of the premier thing to bounce in these decks, but my point is like the crab is kind of just like an ETB big lightning helix effect, you know.
Right. And then the counterspell mode on it, hit a creature or an enchantment, that covers most of your bases. Certainly that most of the threats in standard are
yeah, I mean, it's really good against Landfall, Get Out, and then the crab is just, I think, so clearly the best card in these blue-red mirrors that countering the crab is a big deal too.
Gotcha. Do you think that's why mainly people have moved to 4 when they weren't necessarily playing 4 before?
Yep, okay. I think it's basically the best card you can play in these blue-red mirrors. And, you know, it's kind of funny, too, because Get Out, you know, or Essence Scatter effect normally you would never think would help you trigger your prowess things, but against crab specifically, you get to cast it right before attack sometimes, and it actually does help you.
Oh, right. It's if they try to flash in to tap your blockers or attackers.
Attackers, yep.
Okay, so in terms of new cards, the biggest thing is certainly Flow State. How do we both put this on our top 10 pretty highly? Do you think it's a really strong card? It looks like a lot of lists are playing more Flow States than Stock Ups, for instance.
Yeah, I think that makes sense in these lower to the ground prowess decks. And, you know, with 4 Sleight, 4 Boomerang Basics, they have a bunch of cheap sorceries. I think cheap instants are a little easier to come by with the counter spells, and they're going to have Opt-in Burst Lightning as well. Whereas I think other decks might struggle to play Flow State because even if they could fit in Sleight of Hand or Boomerang Basics, they're usually not fitting in both. And, you know, it matters that your instants and sorceries are cheap with Flow State. You're not trying to, you know, play Day of Judgment and then Flow State after that. And, you know, saving an extra mana, you know, it's not obviously the same as a 2 mana Stock Up. You see 2 less cards, obviously, but saving an extra mana is kind of a big deal, just generally, and also in the realm of getting spells cast from your hands as quickly as possible for stuff like Prowess and Crab.
Yeah, I will say, playing all my brews on the Arena Ladder and Mythic, I've been playing against a lot of Flow States, and it definitely has felt like bashing my head against the wall a lot when they, you know, have no cards in hand, top deck one of these, that sort of thing. It's a very, very good card.
Yeah.
So you know, it is a little bit restrictive. Like, you know, the control decks still play Stock Up. Lessons, I don't know. I think I saw some Lessons lists with a few, but I don't know that they'll end up playing it because the synergy of not being a lesson is a pretty big deal. But yeah, Spelementals in the Prowess deck, I think it's a pretty fair game to play.
Yeah.
These.
Yeah. Maybe not Spelementals. I think they're going to kind of struggle with the sorceries but, you know, maybe I've seen maybe some lists that go a little lower on Winter Night Stories and have a mix of Flow State and Winter Night Stories, I guess. And Winter Night Stories is a sorcery that ends up in your graveyard a lot, to be fair. But then it leaves your graveyard, so
right,
kind of weird too.
Just in comparison to like Expressive Iteration, have you felt that it's about the same when in the decks that it's good? If it's any better, even?
I mean, when it is online, it's better than expressive iteration, right? Like
Yep.
it's just better if it's online. Sometimes it's offline. I'd say, you know, sometimes expressive iteration is also offline, but in the sense that you don't hit, you need to hit a card that you could cast that turn or play that turn, and sometimes you don't. Um, but and maybe, or alternatively, maybe it's like you cast a burn spell at your opponent's face, which, if it was flow state, could be in your hand for a creature. But anyways, I mean, I'd say Express Federation is a stronger card than Flow State, just because it doesn't care about graveyard hate or things like that. I think some of these decks lean, a little bit too much into their graveyard. Like I like Flow State, Eddie Merc Crab, and Storm Chaser's Talent. I think makes sense to play them all, but I'd really try to avoid using your graveyard beyond those cards because you already give your opponent a lot of reason to board in graveyard hate. And a card that I think I see in the sideboards of some of these decks sometimes that is leaning into their graveyard is Sunderflock. Sometimes I see these blue-reds, not Spelementals decks, sideboarding some Sunderflocks just to try to play off their crabs for, I'm guessing, if they get paired against Cub, or maybe it's for Landfall, stuff like that, or I don't know if it's for the Momo deck. But that's pretty scary to me because you're doubling down on your crab functioning, and something like Rest in Peace or Soul Guide Lantern might that not only strand a crab, but also your Sunderflock.
Right, and I have seen these people have the Hearth Elemental in their sideboard too, in a smaller number when they bring in the flocks. That is one of Spelementals, the deck you played the last Pro Tour. That's one of its biggest problems, right? Is like a Rest in Peace.
Yep, definitely.
So I can see not wanting to lean into that super hard. As the deck stands, though, like the main deck, I would say Rest in Peace is probably decent against them, but something like a Lantern, it's not super obvious that it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. If I was playing the Pro Tour, the open deck listing would matter a lot to me. I think as is, I might only want like one, maybe two graveyard hate cards if I had them in my sideboard against the prowess decks. But if I'm a deck that I think they want a Sunderflock and they have the Sunderflocks, I might want 3 or 4 copies of my graveyard hate.
Mm-hmm. What kind of graveyard hate cards are best? Like Lantern, Ghost Vacuum, Rest in Peace?
I think it's really only Rest in Peace and Soul Guide Lantern.
Okay.
I guess Keen-Eyed Curator is the other card that people play, but that one is a little bit more acceptable to just bring in for especially a Burst Lightning deck.
Yeah. What's wrong with Vacuum?
I think it's a little too slow at getting things out of the graveyard. Playing Spelementals against Vacuum as an example, sometimes you just sandbag a lot of cantrips so long as you can hit your land drops, and you play a bunch of them in the same turn, and then they can only exile 1 or 2 of them over the course of the turn before you start playing your crabs anyways.
Gotcha. So even if they have it early, it might not be enough.
Yeah, and then more notably, in all of these blue decks, you see so many cards that, like Soul Guide Lantern, when you find it, can immediately get your opponent's entire graveyard, whereas Ghost Vacuum, after you cast a bunch of ops and flow states and such, when you find it, is going to be really low impact.
Okay, makes sense. So this list that we're looking at right now is just sort of the standard prowess list, and then did you look through this showcase challenge yet? Or
I mean, if you went to 9th place, it's just an example of, I think, the types of stuff you'll see with Elusive Otter builds. So, we see there's no Wild Ride here, but there's 2 Octopus forms. This version actually doesn't have any crabs main. Usually what I'll see is maybe like 12 threats, so 4 Otter, 4 Storm Chaser's Talent, 4 Show Off, and 2 crabs, and then another 2 crabs in the sideboard. This sideboard just has 4 Drake-Catcher, so maybe they think that's better in these blue-red mirrors. And then, still a flow state deck, sometimes some stock up. And notably, I think Counter Magic plays a lot worse in this type of deck because you just want to make sure all your spells are basically always castable. I like this showing a Vibrant Outburst. That's a cool one of. That's a lightning strike that also taps a creature, but it's blue-red. That's worth a lot of damage potentially. It's very crab-like, but on a spell. I think dropping Otter is not like necessarily the part that's an advantage in the mirror, but it's just dropping Otter for things like Get Out and more card advantage maybe that is the advantage in these blue-red mirrors.
I do kind of like the Otter in theory. The games against this deck where they have a turn 1 talent feel so different than when they do turn one like sleight of hand, for instance. So I understand why you'd want to play the otters.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, like, I'm sure you could build this deck with 4 otters main and like that 2 crabs main, maybe 2 more on the board, and post board you probably could just have the same deck as your opponent who didn't register Elusive Otter at all without that much like work.
Yeah, if that's what you wanted to do. Do you have a sense, before we like dive into more of these decks, I guess, do you have a sense of which is going to be the most popular?
I'm going to guess things don't change that much and that people will not register Elusive Otter, or the version without Elusive Otter will be more popular. I'll go ahead and say right now that I expect the version with Elusive Otter to do better at the Pro Tour.
Okay. Interesting. Is that because you expect... well, how do you think it fares in the mirror match?
Like I said, I don't think it's like, oh, I drew Elusive Otter in the Is It Mirror, this is bad. You clearly can, still snowball games with it. I just think that it's probably pretty play draw, like dependent on how good it feels and the timing of when you draw it. When you have it on turn 1 on the play versus your opponent that doesn't have anything, potentially, that's going to be a huge deal. I think it makes flow state kind of better, or like I see this list actually has 2 stock up. I kind of like that, like leaning into just more card advantage type stuff when you have them, because you're just going to have more cheap plays early and you want to make sure that also the prowess is online. This version in particular has a million green sources. That's not how I would build my mana base, but they're getting a lot more value out of Grove's Bounty than maybe other players have been getting.
Yeah, Grove's Bounty.
Yeah, I mean,
so
this
basically
version,
you mostly just cast it for like 1 or 0, right, with X.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I would say I'm not a believer in these Drake Hatchers compared to crabs. I would definitely want 4 crabs in my 75.
That seems fair. I haven't played much of this deck myself, but I've watched some content of people playing different Izzet decks, and the crab seems quite good.
Yeah, it's also, we'll get into Spelementals later. I think there was a Spelementals deck that top baited this event we're looking at, so we can look at that deck list. But in the mirror match, the crab is the best card in Spelementals too, and by the same kind of logic, the crab is really good against Spelementals from all these other blue-red decks. It's bigger than Hearth Elemental. It doesn't get bounced by Sunderflock. It's just a big deal.
Yeah, it doesn't die to any of the removal either. Like, they pretty much just have to bounce it. So I think that's probably a big deal too. Let's see if I can find it.
I was wrong. It's 10th. 10th, right below where we were. 10th place, there's a Spelementals deck.
Cool. I see some Colorstorm Stallions. So it turns out that's an elemental, so it fits in this deck pretty nicely.
Yeah, and like I had mentioned in the top 10, you've got Winter Night Stories if you cast it for the full 5, or Burst Lightning as ways to get the Opus trigger off. I guess also Traumatic Critique. So quite a handful of ways, and I like these ways. I think I'd mentioned you're not going to put 5 mana instants and sorceries in your blue-red spells deck, right? Those would just be a little too unacceptable and clunky throughout the game, but the cards that modally can become them is how you can really enable this card.
Yeah, you don't really need them. I imagine this might be a card that's good in the mirror type, against Izzet. It's haste. It's a little bit bigger. It's pretty hard to bounce even too because it has the ward.
I've seen, one advantage of Spelementals, I guess, is that none of your cards really get hit by Burst Lightning at all. So that's a good starting place. When Burst Lightning's so popular, you're going to kind of completely dodge it. Obviously, there's some matchups where Sunderflock is still totally broken. Cub is really not popular right now, but some people are going to register Cub this Pro Tour. I doubt it's going to be 0. And the people who register Spelementals, if they ever get paired into them, it's not really fixable from the Cub matchup, I'll say. Now that the whole Pro Tour has passed, it's been 3 months, I feel like the consensus you hear every time is when you're playing the Cub deck, you're just going to lose to the Spelementals players.
Yeah, it's one of the more lopsided matchups we've had in Standard in a while. Just the combination of cheap burn, consistency, and playing a Sunderflock, which is like huge problem for them. One thing I like about the Spelementals deck is one of its worst matchups were various control decks. And I don't know that matchup is fixed or anything, but it feels like you have a lot of pretty meaningful upgrades against them between Traumatic Critique, maybe Colorstorm Stallion, etc.
Yeah, and then also this deck is getting kind of Prismari Charm now, which I think this deck can afford to play more than the lower to the ground decks. Because Spelementals is kind of playing weak in the early turns, I'd say. Not playing to the board, obviously. It has literally no creatures to play. And just filling up its graveyard and then suddenly turning the corner with a ton of pressure at the same time, usually backed with Thunderflock bouncing your opponent's board. So it can kind of afford to spin its wheels a little bit more. And Prismari Charm is just this really flexible curate where, you know, curate's been in standard, and obviously this deck didn't play it before, so the modality of this card matters a lot. But now, you know, you don't even have to play stuff like Into the Flood Maw or Bounce Off, I think, correctly, because this card's just going to cover you to bounce weird, you know, permanents or in case of emergency, even if it costs an extra mana. Also, the dealing of the damage is going to matter sometimes, especially if your opponent leads on talent, basics talent, then this can just answer 2 Otters on your turn too. So that's pretty nice.
Yeah, totally. And it puts your thumb against Llanowar even harder too. Which
and of course you also can just play this and deal 1 to your opponent and kill a 1-drop or something too, like a Chocobo. You don't have to have 2 things.
Right. Yeah, so Prismatic Charm ended up pretty nice. And then do you like Dramatic Critique in this deck?
Yeah, that card also seems pretty good here. Just the Abandoned Attachments kind of mode for just blue-red, and then late game being a big burn spell, I think is just pretty like good with the crab and type stuff. And I like that this list still has 4 Winter Night Stories, and honestly, in these more controlling matchups, maybe even including Lessons, especially post-board, I think it happens a surprising amount that you will cast these Winter Night Stories and continually discard creatures to them, because you're not like ready to present a bunch of pressure, and you just hit your land drops and you go for these really big turns late game. So having a literal X spell, I think, is just like a big deal. Before this set came out, the conclusion I'd come with Spelementals is I wanted like 1 or 2 One-Cheat in my sideboard, honestly, because I literally just felt like in slower matchups I could play to hitting all my land drops the whole game, and I just wanted some reward for that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when all your cards cantrip, even for land count is low, you do end up hitting your land drops. Critique's been really good. I have seen some like lower curve browse decks toying with it too. I'm not sure that they should play it, but
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like an Abandoned Attachments that scales a lot better, and it's, if you don't care about Lessons, then I think it's like a pretty powerful card. But I agree. I think that especially like the Elusive Otter deck, I can't really imagine playing with it, but maybe one a bit more controlling that wants to hit, you know, a longer game. The other part is, you know, it's not just a fireball as in go to the face, right? Like you're going to totally play games where you discover you're killing a Badgermole Cub for 4 mana because that's what matters on that turn, and you get a 2-for-1.
Yeah, totally. Or even if sometimes you kill an X1, turn 3, that sort of thing. So pretty nice. We liked it in our top 10 for a reason. Do you know if this challenge had any lessons?
Well, there's a weird version of Lessons in, let's see.
So it looks like we've got one
4th
that
place.
Played Eddie Merc Crab.
Yep. And also a bunch of flow states.
This is interesting.
Yeah, so there's no artist talent and monument, if you're wondering how room was made for all this. And this is actually very similar to the deck Derek Davis top-rated Worlds with. So kind of an interesting take to drop that artist talent monument package. Maybe this player thinks that the artifacts or enchantments are too under attack weirdly. I mean, obviously the Izzet decks, they just have a null, so maybe there's too many nulls floating around, and then maybe the green decks have too many disenchant effects. I'm pretty sure everything I know about this deck is that it's really far behind against the Artist Talent Monument Lessons deck, but I don't really know if maybe it's just gaining a lot in other matchups.
What other matchups do you think it'd be gaining in?
Well, it has Crab, and I've already said I think Crab's really good against Izzet, though this deck doesn't have all the 1-mana, cantrips, so I'm wondering how good the Crabs actually are. But if they're good, then I'm sure they're good in that matchup too.
Yeah, they're probably okay there. I mean, it's mainly just like a prowess deck that uses a different engine, where, I mean, I guess you still have flow state, but
I gotta say, of
Accumulate Wisdom,
all of the Izzet flavors, if I expected, if I had to rank them by win percentage, like I expected the Pro Tour, I would expect this to be the lowest.
Yeah. Well, maybe a lot of people won't play it. Maybe they're just trying this stuff out. I mean, it's not crazy to me to take the lessons package and pair it with a different win condition. I'm not sure Storm Chaser's talent should be in the mix, though. It's interesting. It feels like...
Yeah, I mean, you get boomerang basics, so that's, access to the lesson that matters with it, too.
Yeah, totally. I have, in general, certainly noticed an uptick in Storm Chaser's talent, especially since I've seen, some mixture of, like, Elementals decks playing it, and then when I see lessons lists, they seem to have more of it than they used to. A lot of them were going down to 0, or some would play 2, things like that. I can't tell if that's because people have realized that they should have Storm Chaser's talent because it's so strong with Boomerang Basics and it makes your deck really consistent, or if maybe, like, because there's less green decks.
Yeah, I think that's the reason. I mean, I think talent is just pretty good in these blue-red mirrors.
Gotcha. You don't have big green creatures to block it or attack back.
Yeah, and you're not really worried about blocking with the otters either, I guess, in those matchups.
Right. Has regular lessons gained any tools? Like, do you know the best way to build it?
Basically, no. I think if there's anything new, it might be flashback. Some of its spells, especially Accumulate Wisdom, are just so uniquely powerful when you have it. I could see them adding, just one or maybe more than one flashback.
Sure. Boy, it seems hard to take a deck to the Pro Tour that doesn't really have any new cards. That's usually not a good recipe.
Yeah.
Not that it's a hard rule, but it's just like something I've sort of noticed where new sets do tend to have a pretty big impact, even if it's just a few cards.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, every deck gets a little better, so it seems like a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
I sent you another Is It flavor that has won a couple challenges now. And I guess also in the top 8 of this, Dom Harvey, I guess, is the one that's kind of worked on this, so I think he didn't play as many Stallions. Yeah, he only had 1. But here's a list with 4. So there's also like a flavor of blue-red that its threats are Storm Chaser's Talent, Eddie Crab, and Colorstorm Stallion, all 4 ofs. And this version even has some dramatic critiques, which makes sense with the Stallions. I think the idea here is that in the Is It mirrors, maybe this is the best you can be, because your only burst lightning-able thing are the otters from Storm Chaser's Talent, which is kind of whatever. It's not, totally blanking it, but you don't give your opponent a positive exchange on Slickshot Show-Off that maybe they would have otherwise. Also, the Stallion is kind of just hard to answer generally and not even always something they can top with a crab. So
this makes a lot of sense. This looks pretty good, honestly.
Yeah, this is one where it's really going to depend on the metagame at the Pro Tour. Because if it's all Is It, this does seem pretty good.
But yeah, maybe against Mono-Green or something, you'd really rather have your Slick Shots.
Yeah.
Do you think you could put the Slick Shots in the sideboard? I think that'd be reasonable.
Yeah, maybe. It's always hard because, you get so much mileage, I guess, out of even just a couple copies of a card in these decks that see so many cards.
Right. You could play a couple Slick Shots. Okay. Are there any decks... Obviously, I don't know that the answer is obviously yes, because there's so much Is It going around, but are there any decks that can prey on this Is It field that you've seen?
Yeah. So I think, and, I think it's going to be, it's kind of shown with this challenge we're looking at by the winner and some in top 8. I think Landfall is kind of on the rise again. Which I know might be kind of weird because I think these Is It decks a while ago, or Is It Prowess specifically, seemed favored into Landfall, and Landfall didn't really get anything new. People tried some stuff, but they didn't make the cut. But I think it's a big deal when they cut Elusive Otter. I think that was probably their best card against Landfall.
Sure. And it just stands to reason that the more, hybrid or inbred that they get trying to beat each other, that they would be less prepared for Badgermill Cub and Ice Till and Harmonizer.
Yeah, and even in second place, we see a green-white, Cub Rhythm deck with the Bright Glass Gearhulks and sideboard Sage of the Skies, and I have to imagine Elusive Otter was a big deal in that matchup too.
Yeah,
because you're just kind of racing them. So I really think that slowing down for these Izzet mirrors might, kind of let these two different flavors of Padrimal Cub decks kind of rise. I don't really like calling Landfall a Cub deck, even though I know they always play 4, but it's kind of a incidental card in their deck compared to a main feature.
Right, yeah. It's much different than the decks that are playing Nature's Rhythm like this one is and trying to get a Crater Hoof into play.
Yeah, the Landfall list that won the event had 4 main deck Keen-Eyed Curator. So that's kind of a interesting, direction to go. Makes a lot of sense with all the blue-red decks. And then notably, the one of these, I don't know if it was Spotlight Series in RC, but it was won by Landfall, and they had completely removed Sapling Nursery from their deck. And now, especially the Elusive Otters getting cut, I kind of think people should play Sapling Nursery again. And I'm looking at these Landfall lists, and for the most part, they are. Some of them, including lists that won, don't play any main deck, but had the full 4 in the sideboard.
Gotcha.
And I don't know, it's just like, if you've played with and against Landfall, you know that Sapling Nursery has the potential to completely win the game on its own. So it's a little weird to me, especially as a mono-green deck that's just lacking playable sideboard cards to some extent, to decide to not play a bunch of copies of them in your 75 at least.
Sure, it makes sense. You don't think it runs into getting hit by Get Out? If that's one of their biggest plans against you?
Yeah, I mean, it might. I think you'll have to kind of build your Landfall list accordingly. If you think there's a lot of Get Outs, then things like Esper Origins and Surak are nice directions to go. It just kind of depends on, what you're doing. But I kind of think at the Pro Tour with open deck lists and the mono green deck, I think their reactive sideboard cards are just not that good. And them kind of just playing a big mix of proactive cards in their 75 and kind of presenting the best deck they can against their opponent's interaction might be pretty effective.
Yeah. It is odd to... Well, okay, it's not odd. It makes sense that... So from my perspective, it's kind of like this mono green deck disappeared, which is weird because it was maybe the best deck before Secrets of Strixhaven came out. But I think what's going on is that in my circle, which is content creation and playing on Arena, no one wants to play with this deck because it didn't really get any new tools.
Yep.
But I'm sure the Pro Tour players will do their due diligence and practice against this deck and maybe even bring it to the Pro Tour. So I agree. It definitely
I
has
think
a good
it'll
shot.
have a big rise. I think it's still true in my mind that if your deck is not faster than the Landfall deck, I just don't think it's a favorable matchup for you. I think it's favored in literally every matchup that isn't just a fast deck. And when you cut Elusive Otter, I think you're kind of crossing the line. Now, obviously, I'm just talking about the line of being above or below 50%, and it's not going to suddenly go, to 60% one way or the other. But I think, the prowess decks might have switched from being a 45% matchup for Landfall to a 55% matchup with their changes.
Mm-hmm. Was this a deck you were happy to play against with Spellmentals?
I didn't get the most experience with it, but weirdly, not always. I think when they're not on many Sapling Nurseries, it kind of changes the dynamic. Not always either, though, because sometimes Thunderfluck is fast enough to kind of close through Sapling Nursery, and sometimes it's not. In addition, they have some weird elementals, Esper Origins and Mossborn Hydra. Both can avoid getting bounced. And their deck's just really good. And sometimes the Spellmentals deck kind of flounders and doesn't do anything fast enough, so they'll kind of die. Sometimes Keen-Eyed Curator or Soul Guide Lantern will get you. So, yeah, it's kind of a...
So it's close. It's not nearly the blowout that, the dedicated Cub decks are.
Yeah, definitely not.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. I wonder if any of the new cards that deck got help it here. I feel like Prismari Charm might be decent. Traumatic Critique.
I think those. I think their deck got better, but maybe slower. So that might also, not be great for them in this matchup.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. 4 Keen-Eyed Curator. I mean, this card is a pretty good beatdown creature, especially if you can cast it on turn 2 reliably.
Yeah, and this list has 4 main deck Milch Shredder's Resolves, which I think is more common nowadays. There's just so many creature decks, and the Landfall deck doesn't have many other choices for interaction. I see the other list in 7th place also has 4 Resolves. I think that's all, pretty reasonable. And the 3/3 body is also going to make resolve a little better.
Yeah, makes sense.
And looking at the 75, it's not even that hard to fit in 4 Keen-Eyed Curator. They just don't have any graveyard hate in their sideboard, and they have more threats in their sideboard. So it's kind of just like they have 4 Nursery in their sideboard and 4 main deck Curator.
Right.
But yeah, then I guess we'll go on to some other things. To be honest, if you look at the format just for Magic Online, all these Izzet decks and Landfall are kind of the 2 best things in this format, by I guess a pretty wide margin. I think other things kind of drop down a lot on what we're seeing. Some things I guess I had listed that we might see that maybe haven't been fully fleshed out that got some things from Strixhaven are like Azorius Momo, which I put Daydream as my number 1 card. I thought the flickering of Riddler is pretty good. That deck doesn't look very different from old like mono white Momo. I think you literally just like splash 4 Quantum Riddler in your deck. This list here, that's a good list to look at. It's got a lot of the stuff I like going on. So I think you should absolutely max out on Starfield Shepherd and Quantum Riddler. You just want to have the turn 1 Momo or Drum into Warp plus Daydream as much as possible. It's hard to know how much interaction you want to play in this deck. I see they have, 3 instants, 2 Seam Rip, some Flood Pits Drowners. I think Get Lost and Aang, Swift Savior are like the other cards you can consider to interact with. They have the Pixies, which is mostly, you don't really need to get too fancy with what you can get from Starfield Shepherd. You could maybe play a single one of that you think is good to get like late game, maybe something that's good with Daydream especially. I don't know, I've thought about Spyglass Siren, I've thought about Novice Inspector. Just because at some point in the game, if it's grindy, you'll play out, like the 5 mana mode of Starfield Shepherd for like the last time after you've already pixied it a few times or things like that. And you'll just want it could just be Figure of Fable that you want to get at that point too.
Yeah, I kind of liked one Figure of Fable in these lists. I think it made sense. It's funny, I never tried this deck, even though I thought it would be good, because I figured I would just watch other people do it or play against it and see how it goes, but I don't think I ever played a match against it in my latter games that I was playing throughout the week.
Yeah, I don't think it's a deck that people play very much. Maybe a more tuned version will have to come from the PT. I've been playing it on ladder a little bit. Not too far off from this, like 22 lands. I have 4 Seam Rip. I've been messing around with my interactive slots. I don't have Cosmogran Zenith, but 4 Momo, 4 Drum, 4 Riddler, 4 Sage, 4 Starfield Shepherd, 2 Hylia, and 4 Daydream, 4 Seam Rip, and some interaction. And that's basically the deck.
Yeah. And have you liked it?
Yeah, it feels pretty good. I think you do a lot of powerful things. It's weird on Arena because you play against so many nonsense decks, and I haven't played Arena in a while. I guess I hit Mythic with Historic, so I've been Mythic now. But just like in the percentages, finally back to like real numbers today or something on a recent match. But
yeah, Arena's pretty fun. People play a lot of different things.
I just end up playing Landfall a lot more because they're so good against the slow decks, and the matches go a lot faster. And I hate just playing like the slower decks in the slow mirrors, even though I think my win percentage is probably very high. Also, it just takes an hour instead of like 10 minutes with Landfall.
Right. I pretty early built Blue-White Control with Wanchitong, and because I wanted to play Wanchitong with 4 roads.
Yeah.
And I had like a couple Thunder Trap Trainers, and I had the Wizard counter spells, my cancel, just to try some new cards. And I was doing so well, I was like, oh, this deck's great. But then I started getting into like the numbered Mythic instead of the percent and playing against Prowess, and I was doing pretty horribly against Prowess, so I don't think that's a real consideration for this Pro Tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think this deck might be okay in the blue-red variants if you tuned it around. The old version I think was supposed to be pretty good in the Prowess.
Yeah, wasn't Momo's like big sell that it was really good against Prowess? Like really good?
Yeah, I mean, the Sage of the Skies is really good against them. It's definitely a good spot if they're playing Get Out to have against this deck.
Yeah.
Not that it works that well against Sage of the Skies, but it works really well against like this Riddler change and things like that. I really like having 4 Seam Rips with the kind of, you're looking for things to do with these pixies that you're going to grab inevitably. And I like that bouncing Seam Rip is pretty good against Otter tokens and also Grand.
Okay.
Just
Makes
if they
sense.
play a second Grand, then you can kind of get a free Seam Rip back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just super happy with Seam Rip in general. I like playing 4 in a lot of decks.
Plus I like my interaction. I guess maxing out on the cheaper ones makes a lot of sense to me with Riddler. It's kind of an interesting dynamic playing this deck where, like, in some matchups, especially green ones, you want the turn 2 5/7 Riddler. That's like one of the best things you can do. But in slower matchups, that especially if you play against black decks that can just kill the Riddler pretty easily, like sometimes you want to actually slow roll and play Riddler the normal way where you're getting a lot of cards and maybe not playing it when they're tapped out, maybe, and specifically letting them go into warp so that you can get an ETB later, stuff like that.
Yeah, even though it's it ends up being really good a lot of the time to Daydreamer Riddler, it is technically less card advantage. So I see what you mean.
Yeah, but definitely the top decks in the format do struggle with a 5/7 flying, and mostly they can just bounce it, that's fine, because then you'll get the value again.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not really worried about value if their answer to it's bouncing. But if you're playing Arena, I don't think this will happen much at the Pro Tour, but if you're playing Arena and you're playing against, these Golgari decks that I think are kind of popular now, maybe don't just fire off Daydream on your Riddler.
Sure. My hunch is that this deck will probably be at the Pro Tour and perform decently well. It's a little bit of a gamble because I don't think it performs well in, against like non-prowess matchups, or not as well,
Yeah,
So we'll see.
I would guess it's not favored into Landfall or Cup decks, but the scamming of the Riddler thing is pretty fast. I think, especially if you have Momo into either Riddler or Shepherd scam, I imagine you can win on like turn 4 or 5 with probably turn 5 with maybe some interaction, and that'll work. And it's like purely flying damage, so they're not going to block.
Yeah. Well, you brought up Green-Black, and Green-Black's exciting because it got a ton of new cards from Strixhaven. And it's not so many that it's not even clear which ones you should play or which ones are the best ones. Certainly the deck is built around, at this point, Professor Delian Fell. People have figured out that that card is quite good. It is good. It fits well in the deck, It kind of always does what you want. People are playing 3 or 4.
The question is definitely if your Golgari deck is good, but I think
probably
the
not.
Planeswalker is good, but your deck might not be good enough.
Yeah, but whether or not the deck's not great in the metagame, we could talk about it on its own merits. It's a pretty interesting deck. So Delian Fell, kind of the top end Planeswalker. It looks like this deck in this challenge that got 11th is playing the Unholy Annex and Tragedy Feaster combo, where Tragedy Feaster's the big 7/6 trample demon with ward.
Yeah, I mean, this one's at least a little bit more proactive than some of the builds I've seen that are just like pure control decks that, I'll say this from my PT team. There was some Golgari decks named Golgarbage that people played that were very control oriented, not any creatures really at all, and they could not beat a Ba Sing Se.
Oh no! Why didn't they play the Hamlet?
They started playing the Hamlet, but that's still its own problem that you have to play the Hamlet, right?
Sure.
Not.
Yeah, I saw Andrzej Strasky making some content calling it Golgarbage. I thought that was hilarious.
It's a pretty easy name to come to.
I actually don't know that I really like the NX and the Tragedy Feaster thing. I feel like it's kind of clunky and
it is. I've tried some various Annex things, including with the last set for the PT. And, Annex kind of people at Worlds right after Duskmourn, which, that Worlds Duskmourn was the limited format, the one Javier won for the second time, and Annex was all over the place, and people called it the best card in Standard. And then it's just never been good after that. I think it's maybe just a card that was not actually that good and kind of overhyped.
Yeah, well, if people are prepared for it too, it gets a lot worse. Like it's better if you can like stick it and no one's ever gonna kill it, no one's ever gonna annul it,
Yeah, the demon is really vulnerable into like Seam Rips and Boomerang basics. There's a lot of
and
issues
Hex
too.
Those cards are all kind of new, to be fair.
Yep.
But yeah, those blow it out pretty hard. I actually built a green-black deck, and I'm making a video about it, so if you guys want to see that, make sure to check out the channel. But I built it as like a lower curve deck. I had 4 main deck Duress and sort of Dellium Fell was my top end, and then I just had I had Withering Curse still, but I had all creatures that lived through it, and I had the Sentinel, the one that makes maps, 3/4s, some Emeritus of Abundance. Emeritus of Abundance, by the way.
That card's pretty powerful.
Pretty good.
This is a pretty good home for it, I imagine.
Yeah.
I've tried it in Landfall. I didn't like it, but...
Yeah, it's better here, right? You get back removal spells and stuff.
Exactly.
And
it's pretty good with removal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't want to play a ton, but 2 is the same number I had. It's been pretty nice. The fact that it like prepares itself when you attack can be pretty strong. It means it has to be answered.
No, yeah, it's a real thing to play towards later. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I like these decks. I think this is the sort of deck you'd want to keep an eye on if they decided to do some bans or something,
Yep.
But maybe not super. I think people will play it at this Pro Tour, but I don't expect it to do very well. The other new sort of archetype that got a new addition is the control decks and with Resonating Lute.
Yeah.
I don't see a list that we can look at here.
Okay, let's see if I can find one to send you or talk about it. I mean, it's kind of the same old Jeskai control deck with just some number of Resonating Lute, to be honest, which ramps them into Jeskai Revelation. But, I think those decks are pretty bad against all the top decks. Is it Shells and Landfall? But people still love these decks and try to play them. They also got Great Hall of the Biblioplex, which I had mentioned is kind of a fixer potentially for these types of decks. I guess also Traumatic Critique is a big spell you could have with the loot that doesn't have to be a big spell. But, I'm not a big believer in this. To be honest, I tried some builds building more around the tablet. One of which was just like the Lessons package with tablet and Splashing Jeskai Revelation. And that was kind of like a fun deck. I think whenever you play the Lessons package without Artist Talent, though, you're signing up for a really bad time if you don't play against a deck with creatures that die to the red Lessons. But when you play against decks where you're happy to have Firebending Lesson and Combustion Technique, then I think you can build some really cool like spins on the Lessons builds, including the one we talked about earlier. But you're definitely locking yourself into needing those cards to be good.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But, I mean, the tablet's pretty cool because the Lessons package has just a ton of 1 and 2 mana red spells.
Right. I mean, that deck sounds good. I will say the tablet seemed better than the loot when I read the spoiler. Or when
I
after you told me about
kind
it.
of think that way.
Okay. Interesting.
My deck had Flashback, too. Kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I can probably get you a screenshot of what I was trying around.
Sure.
Really quick. I don't really have a sideboard, but
sure, I can look at it.
It's probably explained the whole deck. It's kind of just Lessons with Jeskai Revelation and Tablet instead of Talon Monument, but
right.
Then you have to fit in white. I played a bunch of the Hall of Biblioplex, which also is kind of like a win con sometimes. Oh yeah, I had the Capstone, the big red lesson, which just kind of like after 4 Revelations, I thought I wanted another big spell, and I thought that one was kind of cool.
That card's fun.
Yeah.
And I can imagine worlds where there are matchups where you'd want a card like that, where it's sort of like this one and done, resolve it, and eventually you'll win. But I think overall it's, a little risky because when you play a 7 mana spell and you have the risk of it not doing a lot,
all right, I don't have that
the board
list.
Can be rough. That's okay.
Yeah, I guess one of the funnier things about that card is even though it's a lesson that exiles itself on resolution, it being a lesson does matter with Grand, and Abandon attachments. And you can just kind of, in the same way that like you could still play Boomerang Basics after you board out all your Storm Chasers talents, you just kind of like discard it a lot when you find it, but then when you find it later, or you ramp into it with Tablet, it's kind of good. Also, your whole deck was either Jeskai Revelations or things that cost 3 or less. So you either hit Jeskai Revelation or multiple things, sometimes including Jeskai Revelation. So that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, I will say it's a lot more relevant in the Lessons deck than it would be in like I've seen these just control decks.
Yeah, exactly. I think having Grand and Abandoned Attachments and caring about the Lessons things in your graveyard make it a little bit more passable.
Yeah. I will say these Jessica control decks, I don't really like how they're built. I don't like how they still have like a bunch of Normalize and Lightning Helixes to go with their 4 loots, because when you play loot on like turn 5 and you leave up 1 land, you can't even cast one of those spells.
Yeah, I mean
XY mana instead of XX.
Yeah, like I said, if this is just a deck that is doing something with a new card, but I'm not a very big believer in it at all.
No, okay. Well, let me try to sell you on my version of the deck then.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I built this deck kind of from the ground up to see if I could make a different version. I did end up with quite a bit of a different version, honestly, more so like blue-red, splash-white.
Splashing Jeskai Rev. Yep, that's another. I didn't play this, but I shelled out something similar. Actually, I played the tablet, so
okay,
still no.
I'm sure you did. Yeah,
but that also involves playing a lot of red removal, like a Braid, or honestly, still Firebending Lesson, because you want to deal 5 damage to Crab.
Yeah. So let's see. I didn't think the loot would be that great, but I wanted to try it because it's pretty cool, and it was definitely better than I thought it'd be. I like that it gives this like kind of powerful top end that you can play as early as turn 4, because one of the things that happens when you're playing regular Jessica control is you just kind of embarrassingly get outgrinded a lot of the time by Storm Chaser's talent and the ilk.
Yep.
But when you have loot in play, it's really hard for that to happen.
That's cool.
Because you just have so much card drawing and mana and things like that. So I kind of liked it in that sense. And yeah, I built this deck not to have no more lies or anything, so the mana's a lot better. It's basically a blue-red deck splashing white using Biblioplex, and then I've leaned really hard into Fire Magic as my sweeper. I think it works pretty well in this deck.
Yep,
you basically need a way to clean up the otters and whatnot, and my mana's consistent for it. And then also once you have the loot in play, obviously the 6-mana mode becomes much more attainable.
Yeah. I will say the mana base in this deck and my Lessons deck really, I think, wants the blue-white slow land. We don't have it yet. We only have Sundown Pass.
I know. Yeah, I agree. Because Sundown Pass does work. It's just red-white is a problem. You would rather it be blue one. But like you don't need your white to come in until turn 3.
Yep.
This isn't for those of you who watched my video about this deck that I made. This is an updated version, basically, that I have on screen here. Basically, I cut some of the 7 drops, like cut a Jeskai Revelation and added some cheaper things, more stock ups and whatnot. 3 Steps Ahead is a card I'm always bagging on. In my mind, it's like kind of a toss up of whether you should just play Refute instead of it. And certainly with things like Deadly Cover Up, I lean towards Refute because it both costs 3 and then it loots, so you can do the collect evidence mode. But in this deck, I lean towards 3 Steps Ahead because you're just gonna have a lot of mana with loot a lot of the time, and so that's more powerful.
Yeah,
and
makes
then
sense.
Since
copy it,
since I'm not playing double white for Day of Judgment and I'm leading on Fire Magic, I do need some removal that kills bigger creatures, so I'm playing Erode.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm not sure if Erode actually ended up better than Get Lost, having tried it, but
I think I like it better in this deck. Maybe I should try some Get Lost.
Yeah, I guess, this is coming from trying the Momo deck, but it's just like, sometimes I just want to cast my spell on their thing on turn 2. And honestly, the maps from Get Lost don't really matter while your opponent still has cards in hand. So it's pretty fine to play early. It's not very punishing to give them maps on turn 2, whereas Erode's really punishing to cast on turn 2.
I would say in the Momo deck, Get Lost seems a lot better to me because you'd rather give them card advantage than tempo.
Yep, that's it.
But I'm less sure about this deck because I've had a lot of situations where on turn 5 I do like a Consult for 4 and then do an Erode.
Right.
Late.
Yeah, the mana does matter. Yeah.
I think the equation is a little different for control decks, I'll say. And then I just maybe I should play a split, but once I'm playing some Erodes, I just sort of just feel like I should play 4, but maybe that's not quite right.
Part of it, in the Momo deck, to be clear, also, I think is that Get Lost plays a lot better with Riddler because you also just want to sequence casting all your removal early and then playing with Riddler at the end.
Yeah, this deck is very much like Erode is getting cast later in the game. But yeah, overall, I don't do super great against prowess when I play this deck. So just a heads up. It is pretty powerful against everything else, though, I won't say. Especially all those green-black enjoyers out there. Bless their soul.
Next on kind of what I wanted to talk about, I guess I'll lump all three of these together. There's some decks that were kind of the all-stars of the last Pro Tour that nobody really talks about anymore. The big one to me is the Cub Rhythm deck, which, makes sense. It was kind of killed off by Spelementals, but, this list got second. This was one I think Matt Nass kind of built pretty similar, just going straight green-white. I've heard some complaints about this deck. The big one is when you drop Riddler, this is a deck that I think did kind of want to mulligan aggressively before, and now that's a little rough without Riddlers. At the same time, I've also heard that the prowess matchup's kind of hard when you play the 3/5 color Cub Rhythm decks, because your lands mostly just deal 2 damage to you the whole game, and you have 4 starting town. But maybe them cutting Elusive Otter could make that deck, good again.
Maybe. I do like the Gear Hulks. I think the plan in the prowess matchup with this deck is just to sort of try to grind them out and then beat them with big creatures before they can recoup with talent and whatnot.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Also, like, consistent access to Sage of the Skies in your mana. I could believe this deck is favored into Landfall and all of the, prowess decks, weirdly.
Okay. That makes it pretty appealing, right?
Yeah, but it's just kind of nowhere to be seen. They're still going to run the Spelementals sometimes. Maybe some versions of these prowess decks are actually good against you. That I'm not as sure of. I guess this version specifically with the Gear Hulks and a bunch of Steam Rips and Melt Shredders Resolve seems kind of over-indexed against Elusive Otter, so maybe them cutting Elusive Otter is actually good for them in this matchup.
Yeah, right.
Because you don't really...
doesn't get seam ripped.
And
they tutor a bunch of seam
whereas
rips.
the horse and crab might be better against this deck, and get out too.
Yeah, I do like the abandoned air temple direction. I think that's mostly the way the deck has to win without Riddler.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the grindier
and
games
mostly you'll just probably have to. I think in general the format has slowed down, which means you shouldn't be mulligan that aggressively with any deck. And you should figure out plans where, things don't go according to plan as much. Like the deck that Tristan won RC Portland with had a Gear Hulk just to get with Rhythms or Formidable Speaker. And that's all kind of saying, his deck seemed like it was very much set up to not get interacted with that much. And just maximizing speed, making sure you mulligan and play out your cards fast. And that's okay, because you'll just get a Gear Hulk anyways and get Mockingbirds, and you'll be able to get all your cards back with either that or Quantum Riddler, basically, as long as your start is good.
Mm-hmm. I might quib with you a bit about the format getting slower, but it's certainly gotten more interactive, I think.
Yeah, I guess those are hand in hand in my mind.
Okay. Well, not always when you're getting beaten down by a bunch of prowess creatures while they're interacting with you, but I get your point.
Yeah, it's not the same as Cub Mirrors, which is what the format was about at one point in time, right?
Sure, that's fair. Yeah. Do you think there's any chance, the Lord and the Cubs Pro Tour was really cool because Cub was super big and everyone brought Cub, but then also it was pretty attackable, and so the bruise sort of won out for the day. Do you think something like that could happen this Pro Tour with Izzet?
I think that might sort of happen, but it's not gonna be a weird hero we haven't seen before. I think it mostly might happen with Landfall. I kind of expect Landfall to be the story this weekend. It is my take on the format. I think there's 2 things that might happen. Either people won't adjust properly for this big resurgence of Landfall that might happen, and they're going to do really well, or people might just index correctly for a big resurgence of Landfall, maybe even with a deck like this, even though comically we're looking at an event where this deck lost to Landfall in the finals. But
yeah. Okay. Interesting. In terms of some other decks, especially since the last format or the last Pro Tour, even there's the Demons deck has seemed to disappear. Blue black mid range.
Yeah, that deck won the Pro Tour. Not that popular. I see it every now and then. It may have gotten a new tool in the Emeritus, the blue one. It's kind of a cool, like, big payoff type thing. It's also a card that can still kill your opponent with Excruciator because it makes them draw 3.
So you can make your opponent cast. It's a story recall in case you're feeling left out. Okay.
Yeah, maybe they'll include it because, it's a card that posts basically the math on Doomsday Excruciator if your opponent can't kill it and you can't kill them with it is that you need to make them lose 3 cards in their library to outrace it. And the Emeritus can do that.
Okay. Makes sense.
Besides that, not very much else new stuff going on.
Yeah, I can't imagine this deck has been performing terribly well, though, because I just haven't seen it.
Yeah, really bad to get out also, and just this counter magic stuff. I don't think it's good in the landfall either, so I think that's a big issue with it. Just, not really any matchups it's preying on, I guess, I think.
Yeah. I saw some, like, blue-black decks that had essentially cut the Excruciators and just added a bunch of Emerituses, some even with Ashling, so, like, Grixis decks.
Yeah.
I don't know about those.
Yeah, I've seen those too. Another kind of home for the Emeritus I didn't think about in our top 10 episode, which I guess we didn't talk about the card too much, is sometimes in these blue-red decks, you'll see sideboard Riddler. And I feel like when they sideboard the Riddler, it's actually because they want a big flying, like, blocker type card for some of the flying matchups. And maybe the Emeritus just does a better job than Riddler.
Yeah, I can see that being a decent sideboard card.
Yeah.
Instead of Riddler. You never really, like, played it for the warp mode.
Yeah, I've played a lot of lessons with Riddler where I just hard cast it immediately. Like, when you play against mono red, you'll feel that way, or stuff like that. And the 5/5 ward is, like, better against Nova Hellkite, as an example, than a 4/6.
Totally. Yeah. Emeritus. What do you think of that card overall? I know neither of us thought it was good enough for our top 10, but that doesn't mean it's terrible.
Yeah, it's not terrible. I did mention it's really competing with Riddler. But that seems like a spot where it could be better. And then also, I think the Excruciator deck, it makes sense with Superior Spider-Man and Doomsday Excruciator synergies.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like it's a card that suffers from just other really good cards in Standard doing its role better, I think.
Yeah.
Where, it's not a terrible card you can put in your deck and it'll win some games and whatnot, but between Riddler and other control finishers and whatnot, it's just not that anything exciting.
Yeah. And then another deck from the finals of the Pro Tour that sees no play is Temur Harmonizer, which I don't really have. I can't really come up with a nice reason as to why that deck fell off the map, if that makes sense. I just feel like, it ultimately, even though I had an absurd win rate at the Pro Tour, first of all, that was a Pro Tour that you could really easily narrow in on trying to beat Cub, and I do think it probably was also good against control decks, just naturally. That's like how the deck functions. So that makes sense that it would do well into, you tune it to beat Cub, and then if you play against control decks, you're also just like have the Splinter Twin combo while being a Consult stock up deck with counter spells. So probably pretty easy to win, and they had Bossing Say. But maybe that was just kind of its perfect storm, just that tournament.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of an inconsistent deck.
Yeah, the mana is pretty bad.
I have lost to it since, where I just like tap out and they kill me, and I'm like, all right, cool, all good beats.
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably is really good against control decks.
Yeah, I agree with that. But
and then you just have to tune your red and blue interaction to be against what's best in the format, but that's kind of hard to do against Prowess and Landfall. They're specifically decks that I think are kind of hard to interact with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, maybe as a last question, I guess there's the Kona decks.
I only wanted to bring up the Kona deck, not because it was a thing before, but it's a thing that got some tools. It's changed a lot since the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles deck, and it just won a challenge. So I figured, winning the challenge right after deck submission's kind of funny, and it has Northwind Avatar now. It's kind of become a blue-red deck, Splash Kona.
That's pretty cool.
Has a cool toolbox of things and wins with Northwind Avatar when it wins. I still kind of think this deck with the red interaction now, I see they have some red removal and Ashling. It's maybe not as all in, even though it's still going to win the combo eventually. I still think this deck has a major problem where like it's bad against things that are fast. I don't think it just magically wins on turn 4 very reliably. It requires a lot of stuff to go on, and I think it's a deck that's kind of asking. It's hoping its opponent is trying to slow it down because it's really good at assembling a win through interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe once again, the Elusive Otter is disappearing might be really good for it. But it's a kind of a deck where I think Landfall would just be favored against it, as an example. Without any interaction from the Landfall sides. Just, they put their power and toughness into play, and I think it just works.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any cards that you think are like sleeper cards from the new set that you think have a chance of showing up that people haven't really discovered yet?
Maybe. I mean, the tablet is got to be high on my list.
Okay.
I'm surprised
people
have gone towards the Lute, to be honest. I feel like the tablet is a better kind of build around.
Interesting. I kind of have been appealed in theory with Ralzeric and Oculus. Kind of wonder if there's a good shell with that.
Yeah, that could definitely be true.
I could see that showing up maybe if someone got a good list. It's kind of not obvious how you should build that, and there's not a lot of example decks and that sort of thing that have done well in the past, so it'd be harder to build. Whereas is it obviously it's just we've got the map for that one.
Yeah. Did you have any other decks you wanted to talk about?
Thank you for listening to the Stock Up Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, you can support us over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. That is the best way to support us. At the moment, it's $1 a month, and you get access to all of our exclusive content that we post over there, as well as access to our Stock Up Podcast Discord, which is growing, and I think we have a lot of fun conversations over there. So go check that out. Of course, you could also follow us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe while you're there. And Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. You can listen to us there, anywhere. And we want to thank our patrons that have been with us from the start, a lot of you, and whoever has joined recently. We really do appreciate it. It means a lot. So please enjoy the rest of the episode. Stick around to the end, okay? And we'll talk to you later.
No.
Okay.
What do you think is going to win the whole event?
Okay, so here's my take. I think a Cup Rhythm deck will win the whole event, but I'm going to say that it won't. That archetype will have a less than 50% win rate at the Pro Tour. I just think what's going to happen is that like 5% of the players are going to register some version of that, or between 5 and 10, and like one of them is just going to 3-0 their draft, spike some lucky wins / matchups that are better, hit some Landfall brackets, beat Landfall a bunch of times, go into the tournament first seed, and then like win the whole thing. That's a
fair prediction. Estimation. All right, I'm going to predict that a control deck with Resonating Lute's going to win.
Okay.
And this is totally based off of like vibes, what I feel, having vague memories of like Shota Yosoka winning random Pro Tours with Control when everyone thought Control was really bad. I think there's a lot of cool tools, and I think there's a chance that someone could spike with a really good list if they figure out the prowess matchup. So that's my uneducated guess about what will win.
Cool.
So we'll see. All right, folks, so that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Good luck at the Pro Tour if you're playing. And if not, well, join along with us. We'll watch some coverage and see what happens. Hopefully it'll be pretty cool.
Yeah.
We'll see you next time. So, if you can flash back to remember spoiler season for Secrets of Strixhaven, this is one of the first cards they spoiled.
Yep.
And it's super cool, and people were really excited about it. I then watched I think it was maybe Jim Davis's review, or maybe he made a short about this card where he ranted about how this card was uninteresting, and I was about to agree with him, but then his reasoning was because I guess it just does it all, where like it both has the discard mode, the draw mode, and the miracle, so you just sort of put it in your deck and you like don't have to build around it, and it just does the thing.
Yeah.
And he feels like more cards nowadays should be not work on their own, but work. You need to put them in decks to have them work. It's something to that effect, which I didn't really care about that. I'm just upset that it's a 5-mana 5/5 flying haste.
I was guessing you were going to say that, because when I read this card at first too, I was just like, well, I'm going to be happy to draft this card and just kill my opponent in 2 turns with it. Like,
yeah,
like,
I know, that's so lame.
I have such a low opportunity to miracle with it.
Yeah, in standard or in limited, you're just, when are you ever going to do the miracle thing? You're just, your opponent's going to die, or they're going to kill it because they're going to die.
Do you know about the interaction with this and return the favor from the bonus sheet? It's really funny.
I do, but why don't you tell me?
Yeah, so return the favor on the bonus sheet is red from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. It has the spree mechanic, and one of the modes is copy target instant sorcery or triggered ability, maybe activated too, and you can choose new targets for it. And the way miracle works is really weird and unintuitive, to be honest. So when you miracle a card, you have to demonstrate that it was the first card you drew this turn. So that's the whole reason you draw your draw steps all weird, is to not let it touch your hand. Then you reveal it from your hand to demonstrate that the card itself has miracle, or in this case, is any instant or sorcery. And then you put a trigger on the stack that says you may pay its miracle cost and then cast a spell. And old Legacy players might know that, like, you can stifle the Miracle of Terminus, but not really anybody played things that copied things, or I don't even know if that effect really existed for your opponent's stuff. But if you copy your opponent's miracle trigger, you could then pay the 2 generic mana to cast that spell from their hand.
Yeah, that's wild.
Which is pretty
and then they don't
weird.
Get to cast it.
Yeah. Now, what's also weird is that is just really unlikely to come up, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Because Return the Favor is also just like, it's red. It could potentially copy and change targets of something. So your opponent would have to miracle like a card draw spell, basically. Because if they miracle something instead that's like just a removal spell, you could just change the target of it and copy it for less mana than the goofy play where you steal it from your hand. So you have, and it's completely face up because they've revealed it to you. So you'll, like, the few times it happens, just to begin with, then you might just look at it and be like, that's not even the right play. Because I could kill their, instead of casting their removal spell from their hand and killing their Lorehold, I could just kill their Lorehold and their other thing for 1 less mana.
Think of the value, though, of showing them your great rules knowledge. Dude, I mean, that's totally the sort of thing I never in a million years would have seen, but someone had to tell me it, and I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting.
It's also, like, at least one thing going for it that might make it likely is this each opponent upkeep clause, because passing with a bunch of mana with Return the Favor seems like a little hard to do, but if they're miracling something in your upkeep, then you have all your mana. So at least it's a little more likely that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe this card is still cool in EDH, because in EDH your opponents don't die nearly as fast to a 5/5 flying haste, but I still feel like the design of this card was off. Like, I feel like it needed to be, a 6 mana 4/7 vigilance ward or something.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know what's going on with this design. I really want to do the miracle thing, but I feel like even if I draft this in limited, my opponent will just die before I get to miracle anything. So that's pretty lame.
Yeah, it's already in one of the more aggressive archetypes in the format too. So it's really likely you'll just play this and they'll be at 0 the turn you cast it.
Right.